The Legal Resources Centre has welcomed Operation Nemo. That's the investigation launched by the SAPS into an alleged ring of predatory teachers and other staff members at elite schools around the country. Learning institutions seem to have become a playground for predatorial educators. While it is mandatory to do so, often incidents of sexual misconduct against pupils are not reported to the police or to other authorities. Charlene Kreuser is a candidate attorney at the LRC and joins me now. Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome, Charlene. How much success do you think a targeted, far-reaching investigation will have within a culture of fear and secrecy such as we've seen at schools?
Thank you for having me this evening. I think it really depends on how the investigation goes. Of course, evidence in these cases are quite difficult, but I do believe a wide-ranging investigation is welcome and incredibly necessary because, as we have seen now, is that this investigation has finally brought attention to the wide-ranging consequences that sexual assault in whatever form has for learners' well-being, and it has also brought to light the fact that many schools choose to deal with these allegations internally instead of reporting it as it should be. And this ultimately means that learners are unprotected and perpetrators can continue to act without consequence.
We'll come back to that theme in a moment. What special aspects in law empower investigations that can get to the very heart of this?
Well, you have the various aspects under criminal law, which is best dealt with the SAPS. So they will follow their internal procedures to make sure that they can, in fact, bring the perpetrators to justice. I think in this instance, we also had a lot of information coming forth from the media investigators, like podcast series, which of course also helps this investigation along.
How successful have cases that have been brought against educators and coaches been in the past, specifically in South Africa, but you can also reflect more broadly?
So in South Africa, we have seen that when we look at how often cases are reported of teacher sexual misconduct or by coaches, we can look at statistics from 2015 to 2021. So, for example, I think, I cannot remember the exact national number, but I had a bit of a look at the numbers in Gauteng and the Western Cape. And most of the instances where there has been allegations of educator sexual misconduct, this has been dealt with internally, but those educators have been fired and are also prevented from teaching again in the future. So I think in that instance, it is quite successful, but the issue comes in that it doesn't necessarily lead to a criminal investigation because oftentimes schools deal with it internally instead of going beyond, going to the South African Council of Educators, going further, going to the South African Police Service. And of course, when it comes to something like sexual assault, that must ultimately follow a criminal route.
That's so concerning, hey, Charlene, because if that is the case, then teachers who might apply, teachers who've been implicated, and have been found to have been guilty to a certain extent, or however they've been found guilty, and they're still, out in public applying for another job, this might not be picked up by a, prospective institution that wants to hire them.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, schools should, when they appoint teachers, they should have a look at whether this person's name appears on, any form of record like the Child Protection Register, etc. But I think the issue here is as well that schools don't often do it. And if, for example, a teacher would apply somewhere and, just make a declaration and say, I have not been found guilty of any offense or there's no ongoing matter against me, then that will ultimately not come out. And this is unfortunately an issue also with how the legislative framework works, because we have criminal laws and we have educator-related laws and then we have children's laws, child protection laws, but these laws don't always speak to each other. So, for example, in this instance that I can use is, schools can decide to do their internal investigation, but they won't necessarily report it to SAPS, and it is ultimately a criminal matter then.
It's not very encouraging, when you paint that picture and you talk about the, sort of silo nature of different pieces of legislation or how they're not, there's no tapestry of cooperation between them. Given that we've said all of this, what can parents and victims or survivors do to ensure that they get justice then?
My first piece of advice would be that whenever a child goes to a trusted adult, whether this is a family member, a parent, a social worker, a child-friendly hotline, that if they report some form of sexual harassment or sexual assault, that it's important that the adult indicates that they believe the child. The adult will then have to, if it happens at school, they will have to report it to the school, because the school does have to follow certain processes. But at the same time, they should also report it to the South African Police Service, because a criminal investigation should happen at the same time. If you get in the situation where you feel that the school is sweeping this under the rug and not taking it seriously, then you can take it further. Then you go to, for example, your district education office, you go to the South African Council of Educators, and you go to the Provincial Education Department. But I do think it's incredibly important that we start believing children when they tell us that something has happened to them, because ultimately it's this culture of silence surrounding this that leads to these horrible things that we have seen, that it happens to so many children, but no one speaks about it because schools choose to put their name first and not the child.
Charlene Kreuser, thank you very much for talking to us tonight. We really appreciate the light you're shedding on this investigation nationally that's being launched by the SAPS to target coaches and teachers, or errant coaches and teachers at the country's schools.